How many more miles did you run?
Oh, probably about 140, yeah, in that range, maybe 140. You know, I have a question. How did 3885 become established as the AM mating frequency?
Oh, you can take...
Oh, boy, that's a story. Greg, I don't want to hold you by the wayside, but...
It is a long story.
Go ahead, back this way.
Yeah, no, go ahead. Answer Jamie's question. I'm listening, because I think I've heard it before, but I want to refresh it. Go ahead, Tim.
All right. Now, back when I got into ham radio as a boot, and was beginning to learn what was going on, you know, it was more cliquish. You had you had a crap load of nets that would meet on particular frequencies, and then if the net wasn't there, there were other stations that were members of the net or whatever that would be there during the day or evenings or whatever, plus or minus whatever net it was. For instance, 3855 was the Green Mountain net. And chances are, if you fired up there during the day, you'd wind up talking to somebody in Vermont or New Hampshire, Maine, Eastern Massachusetts, you know, that kind of thing. Maybe just all over the area. 3860 was, oh boy, W1TJX, Putnam, Connecticut's personal frequency. He'd always be just on that one frequency. And sometimes he would fire up whether you were there or not, which would piss people off. But Stanley Run Power, I remember Blown Away Bob went down to visit him and took photographs of his station. And Stanley had 3 813s in parallel modulated by another pair. You'd seem to have a bushel basket of 813s. Stanley crapped out in 68. Well, you know, then you move up to 3868. That's where Uncle Willie and the Pennsylvania guys all hung out there, eventually drifting to 3870, around that area. 3875, you had a number of guys from New York and Jersey, like Bacon and some of the others, Warren, WA1HLR and others, accrued there. A lot of people from Long Island and whatnot. Then 3880 was the Connecticut phone net. Seeing lots of guys on AM and gals too that, you know, you could run into them during the day or in the evening when the net was going. You know, some of them ran power and had good sounding signals. I remember this guy, K1PPF. And when he keyed up his transmitter, there'd be a powerful ka-thunk. You hear blowers rumbling, K1PPF. I think he had a pair of 250 THs in the final or something like that. So he ran power. Everybody else was weaker. I forget his name, and I haven't heard him in about 50 years, just about. So, 3885 was more no man's land. In the evenings, you had the RCA net, a slop bucket net. And they'd fire up whether you were there or not. But, you know, most of us would get on when we got home from school. So the landscape was different. The nets weren't on then. And One day, Gary, WA1HLR, who sometimes checks in on, I think, the AM phone website, or is a listener. He has not participated yet on 75, although I have talked to him a few times on Farty lately. And he was talking with Chuck, was WA1HLR, and Chuck had the strapping signal of everybody, all the young guys in the Northeast. He had an R13 that he had dehumidified the speech amp, had bass and treble tone controls. He used a stock mod iron with a modulation reactor, and had decent audio. And he had a wide-angle inverted V up for 75, fed with open wire line. It was probably up about 40 feet. So he had a tremendous signal for what he had. Strap. And then you had this divide in a way where the guys I hung out with later on, when I got my genital class license, they all like playing around with AM, and a number of them were getting into dehumidifiering their transmitters and sounding better and all that. And then you had the other side of the coin where the big push and the buzzword was, hey, when are you going to be going sideband? You know, that's what it was. That was the phrase. In other words, AM is passe. You know, it's inefficient, takes up that much more spectrum. You know, there's no real advantage to it, da-da-da-da-da. Just a stepping stone to get on the air, and then once you get established, you know, get rid of it and get yourself a plug-in appliance radio. Rice boxes did not exist. You had the heap shit gear. I think you had the Swine 350. I think Drake was around. Collins, of course. Oh, that was the high price spread. And you had a bunch of guys that when they upgraded from a Johnny Novice to a Georgie General, you know, they'd were on a and sounded shallowy, and they were into damn it, they were into nets, passing traffic, and that kind of thing. That was their thing. So this one guy in Cremanston, Rhode Island, I think his name was Frank, WA1 Echo Juliet, WA1EEJ, who had this holier-than-thou slop bucket accent that his 10-1000 didn't stink. So he and a couple others founded the New England Teenage Net. And they decided to have the net on 3885 because nobody laid claim to it as far as nets go, except for the RCA net, which was much later. So Chuck and Gary were on the air. They just happened to be on 85. And of course, they started up on Slop Bucket on top of Gary and Chuck. Well, Gary had a reasonably good signal with a dehumidified DX100. But Chuck could really put a hurt on them. And Chuck is the kind of guy that if you screw with him and you piss him off, he can be very vindictive, and he'll make your life miserable. So that started a war. And Teenage Net got on every night at 5. Chuck and others would get on at 4:45. And like clockwork, the net just started up all the time. And the battles kept going on, night after night after night after night. Then I finally, I had my Johnny Novice, and I upgraded to a Georgie General. And I do have a tape recording that probably got lost in the fire, where, I think when I passed my genital, I called Chuck up on the phone. And also was a local guy in Dammit-Furs, Jeff WA1GPU, who's still around. I haven't talked to him in about 40 some odd or more years. He moved up the Maine and got into 2-meter CB and stuff, and I don't know. I know he's recently renewed his license because a few of us, or myself and another person, were talking about people from way back then. And so Chuck checked into the New England Teenage Net. It was prearranged on AM. And Jeff GPU checked in. And Chuck says he had traffic for Jeff to pass along to me. And, it was he'd make a mockery out of net forum and decorum. I remember he was calling Jeff WA1GPU, 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 and then he'd sign his call over and over and over again. But you could tell the net control was groaning. And then Chuck passes formal traffic. Congratulations, Tim, on passing your general. Hope to hear from you soon, or something like that. So Jeff, of course, called me on the phone, and I was listening. So that was their way of firing a shot over the bow, like there's going to be another miscreant in here, because they knew that I was a boot at one time. Then I got the novice call. So finally I get on the air, and at that time I had the Crapbox 180, and I also had this Meisenheimer 150B that belonged to the high school that I had fixed up and got going and did up the audio in it, and I was on the air with that. And so then I would jump into it with both feet, and the battle would reign supreme. And then, oh God, the New England Teenage Net people were all pissed off. So, listening in on Slop Bucket. And one of the guys, there was also Frank, I think there was a WA1GLW, there was EEJ, there was Lurch, as in WA1HXF, and they were going to get a carload together, drive up to Acton to Chuck's place and beat the piss out of him. Then they were going to drive up to my place in Hamilton and beat the piss out of me. It had reached that state. And one of the old buzzards from the Green Mountain Net, one of the guys with a Johnson kilowatt and power, had been listening to all this, so he broke in and he bashed everybody's heads together. And it was like, look, this whole mess is getting out of hand, and, he admonished the New England Teenage Net people that if you want to use the frequency, you should ask for it. You might wind up with it. Well, they grumbled and groaned, but, it was like, all right. And then the threat of everything evaporated. Well, sure enough, the New England Teenage Net people would, if they wanted to use the frequency, one of them would get on AM and ask us to use the frequency, and we let them have it. Well, that was, oh God. I think that was in the latter part of the winter into the early spring. So it lasted for a few months. And then when school was out, all those guys pretty much were seniors and they're all going away to college, so the New England teenage net disappeared like that. But there were the underlings, like Drana, WA1HUM, and a few others that took an interest in AM and all that. So the teenage net persisted almost for another year. Then everybody lost interest in it. It just slipped beneath the waves, never to return. But in the meantime, when I lived in Pork Rot, you know, it was myself and Chris the Hod Man, and the RCA net starting up on top of us. Now, I remember the guy's call sign, W1LR, W1HLR, Lid Radio, we called him. He was in Arlington, Mass, or Arslington, in very close proximity to Gross Mark, WA1ION. What you got? Yeah. So, that's the story. That's the story. So, there were, you know, a lot of people seem to think it was a gentleman's agreement. There was no gentleman's agreement. It was taken by force. Well, with the battles with the RCA net, that's when I perfected the atomic yellow. And I had the Blue Magoo up and running then. Well, it wasn't known as that. And boy, I would lean on it till I remember looking at the 811 modulator tubes when I got behind it. And the envelopes were black and there were holes melted in the plates, but they still kept on. Well, my wife is beckoning me to come to the back bedroom to watch some Tear Victim. So I'm going to do that. And I'm going to pull out of the Walking Jamie Home net. N2VJ, that's the story. That's the untold story. That's actually a told story's been told many times. This WA1HLR.